Today, I welcome you to another unforgettable chapter of Royal Affairs Unveiled. And before we begin, let me remind you of our previous video about Emperor Akbar and Anarkali. In that story, we witnessed how the heart of a mighty emperor bowed not before a kingdom, but before love itself. And today, we bring you another love story just as forbidden, just as powerful, and just as transformative. This is the tale of King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, a love affair that shook the British Empire, challenged ancient traditions, and forced a king to make the greatest sacrifice ever recorded in royal history. The early 1930s brought a strange whisper through the winter winds of London, a whisper carrying the name Wallis Simpson. She was not royal, not aristocracy, but an American woman, twice married, and still bound to her second husband. For the British elite, this alone was unacceptable. But the heart does not follow rules. It does not care for status, lineage, or political consequences. It seeks comfort, connection, and the rare presence of someone who truly understands. And that is exactly what happened when Prince Edward first met Wallis. Edward had grown up surrounded by rigid etiquette and cold royal formality. Behind his charm and elegance lived a man aching for warmth, for freedom, for someone who could see him as more than a prince. Wallis, with her confidence, intelligence, and unique charm, saw him clearly. Their first meeting may have been ordinary, but their first glance was extraordinary. Something subtle and irresistible began between them. Their conversations grew longer, their private time increased, and their emotional connection deepened until it could no longer be ignored. Soon, whispers began circulating around the aristocracy. A powerful romance, dangerous, forbidden, unstoppable, was forming. But Edward didn't care. Wallis became the comfort he had been searching for all his life. In her presence, the weight of the crown seemed lighter. In her company, he felt human. But this love stood against a wall built by tradition, religion, politics, and the expectations of an empire. And that wall was the British crown itself. In 1936, Edward became king, and with his coronation, their private affair became a national crisis. Royal advisors, the British government, the Church of England all rejected the idea of Edward marrying Wallis. A twice-divorced American woman becoming Queen of England was impossible in their eyes. They gave Edward a choice. He could remain king, or he could choose Wallis, but he could not have both. The world watched anxiously. Wallis herself was torn. She loved Edward deeply, but she feared being blamed for the downfall of a monarchy. She didn't want history to call her the woman who destroyed the British crown. But Edward had already made his decision. His heart had spoken louder than the voices of an empire. On December 10, 1936, Edward VIII addressed the nation with a trembling voice and a heart full of truth. He said he could not carry the responsibilities of being king without the woman he loved. With that single declaration, he gave up the throne. It was a moment that stunned the world. A king surrendered his crown for love. Centuries-old tradition shattered in a single night. Edward became the first British monarch to abdicate, voluntarily choosing love over power, companionship over duty, and Wallis over a kingdom. After his abdication, he was given the title Duke of Windsor and moved to France. When Wallis's divorce was finalized, they married in a quiet ceremony. Not a single member of the royal family attended their wedding. Wallis was never granted the title Her Royal Highness. Even after becoming his wife, she remained outsider in the eyes of the crown. But for Edward, she was everything. He stood beside her every day, traveled with her, loved her, protected her, and built a life in exile where the two of them became inseparable souls. Their life was glamorous and filled with social circles, yet beneath all of it, they carried a quiet sadness. Edward longed for the family he left behind, and Wallis lived with the heavy shadow of blame. Still, their love endured. Through storms, distance, criticism, and exile, they remained devoted. When Edward died in 1972, Wallis broke down completely. She spent the remaining years of her life in profound loneliness, until she too passed away in 1986. Today, their graves lie side by side in the royal burial ground at Windsor, together in eternity, just as they fought to be in life. Edward once said, I gave up the throne, but I gained my true kingdom. And that kingdom was Wallis. This love story, just like the tale of Akbar and Anarkali, reminds us that whether it is the Mughal throne or the British crown, love has the power to rewrite history. I am your host, and this is Royal Affairs Unveiled. Join me again for another royal secret, another forbidden romance, and another untold story hidden